Welcome to the Atheist Alpha course, which aims to give you a blueprint for modern living and the insight and tools you need to have a great life without the need for a false deity. Long before the monotheistic religions we have today, as a species, we've always asked the same age-old questions. Why are we here? What's life all about? These questions are asked because people not only fear death, they search for meaning, truth, and purpose in their lives. We hope to give some answers with this course. It's in 4 parts. Part 1 covers why it's sensible to believe in no God and the problems with the present monotheistic religions. Part 2 covers the similarities between religion and totalitarianism, the threat of theocracies, and evolution, science and reason. Part 3 covers original sin, free will and morality, and explains why religious moderation is bankrupt, and it also has an atheist test. And Part 4 puts things in an historical context and explains why secularism without religion is the way forward and what you can do to help. For those of you who are already atheists, much of this course is elementary, although we hope you find it entertaining because it uses ridicule as the vehicle. Religion hates ridicule because its position is absurd. Like the emperor in his new clothes, it's important for religion to be given respect so it can retain its status, its prestige, its position, and therefore its power. Once even a child points out the obvious, the illusion is broken. For those of you who are religious, agnostic, or questioning their faith, you may find some of the content offensive, but as the philosopher Daniel Dennett says, there is no polite way to suggest to someone they have devoted their lives to a folly. Being offended does not constitute an argument. I'm offended by lots of things done in the name of religion. The aim, though, is to enlighten and educate. We live in a secular society with freedom of speech, and that's great, but not just because I can give you my view. It's great because I can listen to your view, get different perspectives, and not have a closed mind. And in that regard, I'd be grateful for your comments on this course. A common question people ask atheists is, if you are sure there is no God, why waste all your time and energy? In a nutshell, it's because those that do believe affect the lives of the ones that do not in countless negative ways. As Christopher Hitchens puts it, religion, particularly organized religion, is the biggest source of hatred, conflict, and misery that mankind has had to endure. So let's start with why it's sensible to believe in no God. John Lennon said, "Imagine no religion." Richard Dawkins put it rather less succinctly. Imagine no suicide bombers, no 9/11, no 7/7, no crusades, no witch hunts, no gunpowder plot, no Indian partition, no Israeli-Palestinian wars, no Serb-Croat Muslim massacres, no Northern Ireland troubles, no honour killings, no shiny-suited bouffant-haired televangelists fleecing gullible people of money. God wants you to give till it hurts. Imagine no Taliban to blow up ancient statues, no public beheading of blasphemers, no flogging of female skin for the crime of showing an inch of it. Every day there is something, whether Boko Haram arbitrarily massacres some people, or Charlie Hebdo, or ISIS hanging or throwing homosexuals off roofs. Now let's state right from the start that atheists can't prove God does not exist. We can't prove a negative. But only in the same way we can't prove fairies and leprechauns and unicorns and Santa Claus don't exist. We feel sure that you as a reasonable person would require sufficient evidence in order to truly believe some of these things. All worshippers are atheists to some extent. Christians, for instance, don't believe in Zeus, Vishnu and Muhammad. You probably accept that if you were born in Scandinavia 1,000 years ago, there's a good chance you may have believed in Thor. If you were born in ancient Greece 2,000 years ago, you may well have believed in Apollo. There are thousands of gods out there, and if you are a believer, chances are you don't believe in any of them except one. Atheists just take it one god further. So a Christian can't disprove Hindu or the Muslim god or vice versa. So when it comes to Muhammad flying on a winged horse to visit the heavenly realms, or the golden plates that Joseph Smith supposedly translated into the Book of Mormon, or the Scientologists claim that an intergalactic emperor named Xenon placed people in a volcano and blew them up, isn't it more sensible to say all prophets and revelations are equally false? Why are your superstitious claims exempt from this same requirement? There's probably not a God, like there's probably not a monster under my kid's bed. There's no proof of God. Revelation is different from proof. This is different from science, which makes claims, tests the hypothesis, and delivers proof. The reality is there is no divine authority caring about you. People are good and evil. You, along with your fellow primates, are alone, and so you have to take the responsibility. We have to grow up, and that means leaving behind the monsters under the bed and the mythical creatures in the sky. So we know there are 1,000 gods you could worship, but Poseidon worshippers are thin on the ground these days since we developed meteorology. People sometimes use a simple bet called Pascal's wager to justify clinging to a belief. They say if you don't believe and you're wrong, you're in deep trouble with God and hell awaits, whereas if you believe and you're wrong, well, you just die and you haven't lost anything. But there are a few problems with that. Firstly, there's the risk of worshipping the wrong God. Imagine going to heaven after a life as a good Christian or Muslim and finding you're going straight to hell because God is Ra. Secondly, think of all the billions of hours every week spent praying to all the wrong gods, all the unnecessary guilt, all the money and time spent worshipping to an imaginary friend, completely wasted. And it's not just the chance of picking the wrong God, it's all the subsects. So it's not just Hindu, Jew, Christian or Muslim. In Christianity alone, there are more denominations than there are sentences in the Bible. Some 30,000, including Baptists, Methodists, Calvinists, Seventh-day Adventists, Mormons, and at best, only one of them is worshipping correctly. Christians can choose or make their own church according to their own moral precepts. What would the God say when you went to heaven and you were worshipping the wrong way? And just because we stopped burning heretics at the stake a couple of 100 years ago for these differences, they're still there and they still cause division and are still very real. Presently, Sunnis or Shiites worship the same God and kill each other with impunity. Also, if for instance a Christian God did create us, he knows that most humans get their religious instruction from their parents, and he is watching with impunity while Muslims, Hindus and Jews are born and live and die without any real chance of getting into paradise. More importantly though, is if I accept the teachings of any one of these churches or religions, because God is nowhere to be seen, I have to allow a fellow primate to interpret the will of this God and put themselves in a position of power over me. This can include dictating how I dress, what I eat, how and when I can have sex, or even when it's okay to blow myself up. This is like a divine North Korea, a permanent celestial supervision, unshakable, unchallengeable, no privacy, no liberty. At least with North Korea you can die and leave. With religion, it's forever after. Religion is a gold-plated excuse to stop thinking. It presents assumptions as axioms. God made the universe, and therefore it's logical he made us and the birds and the bees. A conclusion based on an assertion treated as an axiom. We have to stop honouring people of faith. Virgins don't give birth, dead men don't walk, bushes don't burn forever. Every society has mythology, but we need to rid ourselves from the explanations we made for ourselves when we did not know about biology, chemistry or physics. All the big monotheistic religions claim they are exclusively right, and they have been in conflict for centuries. No amount of belief makes something a fact. There is no basis in reality. People proclaim faith with no evidence at all. You shouldn't be able to claim a special right just because you claim your own bigotry is divine. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. All these cults are based on the premise that a particular God exists, and none of them has any more proof than the other. The nature of these deities, as narrated, is irrelevant. They are all mythological, unfalsifiable creatures that preclude any rational assertion they exist. Until any one of them can rectify that by providing proof, they are all equally fictitious. The great unmentionable evil at the centre of our culture is monotheism. From a Bronze Age text known as the Old Testament, 3 anti-human religions have evolved: Judaism, Christianity and Islam. These are sky god religions. They are literally patriarchal. God is an omnipotent father, hence the loathing of women for 2,000 years in those countries afflicted by the sky god and his earthly male delegates. The sky god is a jealous god, of course. He requires total obedience from everyone on earth, as he's in place not just for one tribe, but for all creation. Those who would reject him must be converted or killed for their own good. Ultimately, totalitarianism is the only sort of politics that can truly serve the sky god's purpose. All gods need to be kept on a leash because they all follow ancient laws written by anonymous authors in dead languages by ignorant, racist, sexist, superstitious, goat-herding barbarians who believed everything they couldn't explain in the world was magic. Let's start with Christianity and look at some of its obvious failings, although it's pretty much like shooting fish in a barrel. This is a belief that some cosmic Jewish zombie can make you live forever if you symbolically eat his flesh and telepathically tell him you accept him as your master so he can remove an evil force from your soul that is present in humanity because a rib woman was convinced by a talking snake to eat from a magical tree. Makes perfect sense. Richard Dawkins describes the God of the Old Testament as arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction, jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. All religions have to rely on faith and turn their back on reason and science. A great example of this is the creationists. These are Bible literalists who think that the talking snakes in the Jungle Book and Harry Potter are fiction, but the one that had the conversation with the rib woman in the Garden of Eden, well, that's true. So on this basis, the earth is only 6,000 years old, it was created in 6 days, and man roamed the earth with the dinosaurs. It would be funny except for the growth of the Christian right in America. With billions of dollars a year in tax exemption, they have become a huge political force and are promoting and lobbying for so-called intelligent design to be taught in schools. And 4 US states are actively considering new legislation. And because in this world life doesn't evolve, when God decided to drown all the people on the planet, including the babies, he spared Noah and his family so he could collect all the species, like the 250,000 species of beetle alone. And after the flood subsided, the 2 kangaroos travelled back the 7,000 miles to Australia, leaving no trace of their journey, just like the penguins back to Antarctica. But even if you don't believe this nonsense, there's plenty of other stuff that disqualifies the Bible as a source of moral code. Let's just run through some of them briefly. The Bible has detailed instructions for how to keep your slaves. It sanctions genocide and child sacrifice, and condemns all gay people as second-class citizens. According to the Bible, rape and bone cancer in children is all part of God's plan, but homosexuality, well, that's your choice. Talking about rape and children, the institutionalized rape and torture of tens of thousands of children in the Christian church's care has been disgraceful. All children are born atheists. They have to be indoctrinated into their faiths. Telling a child they were born in sin and can spend forever burning in hell. To many atheists, this is tantamount to child abuse. Some people say, well, look at all the good religious people do. Yes, some do good, but there is not a single moral act they do that an atheist couldn't. Charities like Médecins Sans Frontières help with no strings attached. Religious charities often bring food but preach no family planning or contraception. We'll talk more of this later. When the Church strengthened its hold on mankind after the decline of the Roman Empire, we had centuries before science and reason could challenge the might of the religious powers. People were frightened and coerced for half a millennium, and the Church did it all with the bullying threat of eternal damnation. People associate criminal activity with menaces in Italy with the mafia. The Church had developed the concept of extortion long before. The Vatican was literally built from the proceeds of the sale of indulgences, where people could be excused their sins and get to heaven earlier. Of course, there are not as many miracles around these days, and God's power seems to be in decline. In fact, nothing supernatural seems to happen anymore, and apart from appearing on toast, sightings of Jesus and the Virgin Mary are becoming rarer on the ground. Christianity is caught between a rock and a hard place. It has always claimed to know all the answers and be the guardian of absolute truth, yet it does not fit in with modern civilization. Many of the values it has are way past their shelf life. It cannot be used as a source of morality in its entirety, but only selectively, and then only in elementary terms, such as don't kill, steal, or lie. The stake burnings, the Crusades, the Inquisition, witch trials, all could have been avoided. It has kept women from controlling their own reproductive cycle, hamstrung their empowerment, and is responsible for the death and suffering of millions around the globe, particularly in Africa, by preaching AIDS is bad, but not as bad as condoms. It's easy to be skeptical of Christianity. It only has its faith to justify itself, and it's desperately trying to square the circle and update in the modern world, but it is on the back foot. Many priests nowadays are like gays in the 50s. Many don't believe, but they are trapped. They work hard at good causes to make up for the hypocrisy of believing outwardly in this nonsense. Of course, the true believers are often on the golf course. Expect in our lifetime some pontiff to change and put into place the thin end of the wedge and say, well, homosexuals are not an abomination in the scriptural sense, or a condom actually can be used where the husband has AIDS and the wife not. Just because we are not burning people at the stake for heresy like 3 centuries ago, don't think we have brought Christianity fully to heel. It is a proselytizing creed which, read literally, is cruel and wicked at its heart, and the same can be said for Islam. Just as Christianity professes to be the only truth, the basic premises it relies on can be applied to any religion. Instead of the Bible, you can easily substitute the word Quran. This is what any religious fundamentalist looks like to an atheist. Harry Potter is the one true prophet of Rowling. Join House Gryffindor or spend a lifetime in Azkaban. There is no better present example of how religion is holding back mankind than Islamic fundamentalism. Winston Churchill described it as a strong retrograde force which paralyzes the social development of those who follow it. A fearful, fatalistic apathy combined with fanatical frenzy. Such fundamentalism breeds despair even in many Muslim societies. Some people ascribe Islamic fundamentalism as a response to Western imperialism, as a reaction to the West having subjugated Muslims for decades. Yet this is nonsense. Much of Asia, such as Singapore, suffered under imperialism, yet now it booms. The unpalatable truth is that most of the Middle East's troubles derive from an adherence to a medieval culture that recoils from innovation, promotes religion far beyond its proper place in mankind's affairs, and in particular, it institutionalizes the oppression of women. If you criticize Islam, a common retort is, you're being Islamophobic. Radical Muslims say someone is Islamophobic like the term was an accusation of race hatred on par with homophobia or bigotry, when it is only an objection to an extremist and absolutist religion. But Islamophobia is a meaningless term used by irrational people when unable to rebut a rational criticism. Religious laws are often immoral, and it should not be taboo to mention that Islam has a central core to convert, subjugate, or kill non-believers. It should not be taboo to say fundamentalists put the law of God over laws of men. They do not believe in democracy or a secular society, but they do believe someone can and should be killed for drawing a cartoon or writing a book. Islam re-emerged in the 1970s as a political force for reform and revolution, and in this form it is an ideology as much as a religion. And using the euphemism reform to describe the changes this form of Islam brings is the most depraved sort of cynicism. The persecution of minorities, oppression, subjugation, misogyny, these are hardly reforms. The repression and subjugation of women within Islam is particularly abhorrent. The Taliban in Afghanistan are bringing their own version of hell on earth. The average lifespan in Afghanistan for women is 44. The literacy rate is 12%. They have nearly the highest pregnancy and infant mortality rates. GDP is lower than in 1820. Even in affluent countries, women are subjugated. Saudi society is brainwashed by Wahhabism, one strain of the Muslim faith. From 3 or 4 to 18 or beyond to university, people have to memorize, and whoever dares argue or question anything is called upon to ask Allah's forgiveness or they will go to hell. Women are not allowed to drive, there are no cinemas, they've banned books of various intellectual streams, and minds are prevented from thinking, considering, comparing and choosing. Who are the men who decide how a woman should behave in these societies? What gives them that right? Why should women be worth less than men? The subjugation of women is explicit by those who interpret the word of God. The 4th chapter of the Quran says, disobedient wives should be whipped by their husbands. Women are sexualized from an early age. Children are forced to marry older men. They are forced to wear a veil, not allowed to be educated, to listen to music, and are completely segregated. A woman's face is her identity. Under no circumstances should women allow their identity to be obliterated. Acid attacks and honour killings are commonplace, and there is irony and often contradictions in fundamental Islam. There is the fact that many militants abhor music or television, the internet and film, and turn their back on Western values, although they are happy to utilise Western technology in the form of mobile phones or YouTube. They use two symbols of Western technological development, aeroplanes and skyscrapers, to devastating effect on 9/11. So while Muslim apologists say 19 men did this, not an entire religion, atheists say your entire religion did this to 19 men. Most of these hijackers were well educated and wealthy enough. They were not cowards as the Western media portrayed them, nor were they lunatics in any ordinary sense. Their religious faith, their perfect faith, gave them the morality to slit stewardesses' throats and believe they were doing good. So it reinforces Stephen Weinberg's view. With or without religion, you would have good people doing good things and evil people doing evil things. But for good people to do evil things, that takes religion. And although there are legitimate injustices in the world, such as the rights of the Palestinian people, once these pretexts have been dealt with, many Wahhabi-inspired militants will turn to other grievances with the Western world. Drinking alcohol, impropriety, gambling, cohabitation, inappropriate dress, even democracy itself, without any thought of their religion's own failings. So a question we have to face is, how do we deal with people who think, in their version of Islam, it's okay to behead anyone they regard as an enemy, basically anyone who does not believe the same as them, perhaps for drawing a cartoon. These same people who think it's perfectly moral to rape prepubescent slave girls, but their morality does not allow them to have a bacon sandwich. How can you have a dialogue with someone who thinks it's right that a young girl should have acid thrown in her face for daring to learn how to read, and that a lesbian couple living and working in peace, they should be stoned to death? Islamism, with its heavy emphasis on religious identity, dehumanizes others. We hear from politicians about tolerance and respect and community cohesion, yet many Islamists want to kill Jews, torture and murder homosexuals, and other progressive causes. Practiced in this version, it is far more than a religion. It is an invasive political supremacist ideology that exploits religious freedom and cultural guilt in the West to impose itself with demands for special treatment, all backed up with the implicit threat of conflict and violence. Much of the West is just starting to wake up to the fact that we are at war with Islamic fundamentalism, and evil actions are not confined to the Christian or Islamic faiths. This takes us to Judaism, which is not so different from the other monotheistic ones. As with the other Abrahamic religions, the God of the Old Testament is a violent, angry, jealous, psychopathic murderer. He demands obedience and then commands his generals or angels to kill those who reject him. His commandments tell us essentially not to think about things. Bill Maher says the main difference between them is that Jews mumble to the wall, Christians mumble to the ceiling, and Muslims mumble to the floor. Atheists say that they all have to be wrong, because they are contradictory to logic, and wanting to follow such a God is immoral. Judaism subjugates and separates women, although this does happen more within the orthodox sects of the religion, and like the other two, indoctrination of children begins immediately. It has its silly rituals like the others, and if you want, you can talk to a brick wall, starve yourself on Yom Kippur, swing a chicken round your head, or spend every day praying towards the direction of the Western Wall. As for specific problems with Judaism, much of the violence in Israel is because of the mythical claims of land divinely promised to them. The colonialism, The annexation of land and the denial of Palestinian human rights has caused untold misery. And you can use the circumcision argument. Ultra-Orthodox Jews see it as a custom for the mohel, the guy who cuts the penis, to use his mouth to suck a drop of the baby's blood from the penis after the cut is made. So in 21st century New York, for instance, over 3,500 newborn babies a year are getting their penises sucked by grown men in the name of religious freedom. In 2005, 3 babies contracted herpes and 1 died. Imagine if circumcision was not allowed until the child became an adult capable of making rational choices. It would be very interesting to see how many of them then decided to have the operation done in the name of faith. Christianity, Islam and Judaism share the same currency, certainty. They all know they are absolutely right and they are not prepared to question that belief. And that gives them the certainty they need to commit these acts of evil. And over the years, it has become custom not to question their versions of absolute truth. As Salman Rushdie says, the moment you declare a set of beliefs immune from criticism, satire, derision or contempt, freedom of thought becomes impossible. All these religions have is their versions of belief. But no amount of belief makes something a fact. People proclaim faith with no evidence at all, but it has no basis in reality. I could believe we all live in the Matrix, or I have a pet dragon, or Elvis works in the chip shop at the end of the road, but I have no evidence, just the same, belief. And religion aims to subjugate us, it plays on our fears and feelings of self-worth, and it divides us. Atheists say, a plague on all your houses. So whether you are talking about Islam, Christianity or Judaism, it all boils down to a branch of the cult of Yahweh. This works for Zeno as well, just in case you run across a Scientologist. The angle atheists stick to religiously, pun intended, is now, in this age of discovery, no one could ever come to the conclusion that some mythological being actually exists unless they have been indoctrinated. Religion is something left over from the infancy of our intelligence, and it will fade away as we adopt reason and science as our guidelines. The problem is the mind-forged manacles are the ones most difficult to break. And it is in this context of brainwashing, in part 2, we shall look at the similarities between totalitarianism, religion and theocracy, and also cover evolution, science and reason as an alternative. Part 3 covers ethics, free will and morality, explains why religious moderation is bankrupt and also has an atheist test. And the final part 4 puts things in an historical context, explains why secularism without religion is the way forward and what you can do to help. Thank you for watching, and if you have enjoyed this, please subscribe below for the other parts shortly.